Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale inspires and warms the heart. Today, we bring you the journey of Amanda, a resilient woman running a small restaurant in her village while raising her young daughter, Sophie. What starts as an ordinary day turns extraordinary when a simple act of kindness toward a stranger changes her life in unimaginable ways. This story will remind you of the transformative power of compassion and love. Don't miss this heartwarming journey. Subscribe to our channel and join us for today's inspiring tale. Let's begin with Life Stories. The morning sun bathed the small town in a soft, golden glow, and the gentle hum of life could be heard through its sleepy streets. This was where I had made my home, a quiet town where everyone knew each other by name, and the rhythm of life moved at a slower pace. My restaurant, Emily's Kitchen, sat in the heart of it all, a modest little building with mismatched chairs, worn wooden tables, and a hand-painted sign that had seen better days. It was my pride and joy, the legacy of my late mother, who had taught me everything I knew about food, love, and perseverance. Running the restaurant wasn't easy. The bills piled up faster than the customers came in, and each day felt like a battle to keep the doors open. But amidst the challenges, there was always Sophie, my 7-year-old daughter, who was my reason for everything. Her boundless energy and infectious laughter were enough to brighten even the darkest of days. That morning, Sophie and I walked to the restaurant together, a basket of fresh vegetables balanced on my hip while she hummed a cheerful tune. The air was crisp, and the scent of blooming flowers mixed with the faint aroma of wood smoke from chimneys. We rounded a corner, and that was when I saw him. The man sat slumped on the roadside, his clothes tattered and his face smudged with dirt. He looked exhausted, his shoulders hunched as though the weight of the world rested upon them. His hands were outstretched, not in entitlement but in quiet desperation. His hollow eyes met mine, and for a moment, I felt my heart ache for him. "Mom, look," Sophie whispered, tugging at my skirt. "There's a man over there." I nodded, setting the basket down. "Stay here, sweetheart," I told her gently. I approached him cautiously, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't quite explain. "Are you all right?" I asked softly, crouching beside him. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "I'm hungry," he said, his gaze falling to the ground. "I haven't eaten in days." "Why are you here? Do you have anywhere to go?" He shook his head slowly. "No home. No family. Just here." I glanced back at Sophie, who was watching us curiously, and then returned my attention to him. It was clear he had nothing left. No one to turn to. For a moment, I hesitated. The restaurant wasn't exactly thriving, and every penny counted. But then, I remembered my mother's words, a mantra she had lived by: kindness is a gift everyone can afford to give. "Come with me," I said, standing and holding out my hand. "I'll give you something to eat." He blinked, his expression a mix of surprise and disbelief. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Because you're hungry," I replied simply. "And I can help. That's reason enough." For a moment, he hesitated, as though trying to decide whether to trust me. Finally, he took my hand, and I helped him to his feet. Sophie fell into step beside me, her small hand in mine. "Mom, are you sure about this?" she whispered, glancing at the man with wide eyes. "What if he's dangerous?" I smiled, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "We should always try to see the good in people, Sophie. Everyone deserves a little kindness." Back at the restaurant, I led him to a table in the corner. Sophie fetched him a glass of water, her curious eyes never leaving him. As I busied myself in the kitchen, I called out, "What's your name?" "Zachary," he replied, his voice quiet but steady. "Well, Zachary, you're in for a treat," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "I make the best rice and beans in town." A faint smile tugged at his lips, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. As the food cooked, Sophie peppered him with questions, her natural curiosity getting the better of her. To his credit, he answered her gently, though his responses were vague. When I placed the steaming plate in front of him, he hesitated for just a moment before taking his first bite. Then, as though he couldn't stop himself, he devoured the meal until the plate was clean. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to," I said, sitting across from him. "Just pay it forward someday." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the table. Something about him intrigued me, though I couldn't put my finger on it. He seemed guarded, as though he carried secrets too heavy to share. Still, he had a quiet dignity about him, a strength that shone through his weariness. As the sun began to set, I found myself wondering about him, where he had come from, and what had brought him to this point. But I didn't press for answers. Instead, I simply offered him what I could: a warm meal, a safe place to rest, and a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. For now, that was enough. The next morning, I woke up early, as I always did, to prepare the restaurant for the day. Sophie was still asleep, her small form curled up beneath the covers, clutching the worn-out teddy bear that had been her companion since she was a baby. I tiptoed around the house, careful not to wake her, and made my way to the restaurant. To my surprise, Zachary was already awake. He sat on the front steps, staring out at the sunrise, his hands clasped tightly together as if he were holding onto something unseen. There was a quiet intensity about him that I hadn't noticed before, a weight that seemed to anchor him to the spot. "You're up early," I said, stepping outside with 2 cups of tea. Zachary turned, startled, but his expression softened when he saw me. "I'm used to waking with the sun," he said. "Old habits." I handed him a cup and sat beside him, the warmth of the tea seeping into my hands as the cool morning air wrapped around us. "I hope you slept well," I said. "Better than I have in years," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For a while, we sat in comfortable silence, watching the world come alive around us. The birds sang their morning songs, and the faint aroma of fresh bread from the bakery down the street mingled with the crisp scent of dew on the grass. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" I asked gently, breaking the silence. Zachary hesitated, his jaw tightening slightly before he nodded. "More than I'd like to remember," he said. I placed a hand on his arm, offering a small gesture of comfort. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here." A faint smile flickered across his face, though it didn't quite erase the shadows in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "You're different, Amanda. Different from anyone I've ever met." I laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Different good or different bad?" "Different good," he replied, his voice sincere. Before I could respond, the door behind us creaked open, and Sophie appeared, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Mama, I'm hungry," she said with a pout. "Are we opening the restaurant soon?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said, ruffling her hair. "But first, let's have some breakfast. Zachary, will you join us?" He nodded, his lips twitching into a small smile. "I'd like that." Inside, the 3 of us worked together to prepare the restaurant for the day. Sophie chatted excitedly about everything and nothing, her energy filling the room. Zachary was quieter, but I noticed how his gaze softened whenever he looked at her. It was as if her innocence and joy were a balm for whatever weighed on him. As the morning wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Zachary was holding something back. He was polite and helpful, but there was a guardedness to him, a hesitation that made me wonder about the life he had left behind. Later that afternoon, as I wiped down the tables after the lunch rush, Zachary approached me. His expression was serious, and there was a note of reluctance in his voice when he spoke. "I need to leave," he said, his words catching me off guard. "Leave?" I asked, setting the cloth down. Where will you go? Back to where I came from, he said, his gaze dropping to the floor. It's time. I frowned, unsure of what to say. Are you sure you're ready? You've barely had time to rest. I don't want to impose, he said quickly. You've done more for me than I deserve. That's nonsense, I replied firmly. But if you're sure, I won't stop you. At least let me give you something for the journey. He looked at me, startled. Amanda, you don't have to. I insist. I interrupted, reaching for the small pouch of coins that Sophie had found the day before. Take this. It'll help you get where you need to go. For a moment, he hesitated, his hand hovering over the pouch as though it was something sacred. Finally, he took it, his voice thick with emotion as he said, "Thank you. I'll never forget your kindness." I smiled, though there was a lump in my throat. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Take care of yourself. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of gratitude and something I couldn't quite name. Then, with a quiet goodbye, he turned and walked out the door, leaving me with an ache in my chest that I didn't fully understand. As the day wore on, I found myself thinking about him more than I cared to admit. There was something about Zachary, something unspoken and mysterious, that had left a mark on me. I only hoped he would find whatever it was he was searching for. The week after Zachary's departure felt quieter than usual. Though life at the restaurant continued its familiar rhythm, I couldn't help but feel his absence. Sophie noticed it too, though in her childlike way. She expressed it with questions I didn't have answers to. Do you think Mr. Zachary will come back, Mama? She asked one morning as we prepared for the day. I paused, kneading dough for the day's bread, and offered her a soft smile. Maybe, sweetheart. Sometimes people need time to figure out where they belong. Sophie seemed to consider this, her brow furrowing in thought. I liked him, she said finally. He was nice. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. He was. Wasn't he? The days stretched into another week, and though the restaurant's daily routine kept me busy, I couldn't stop my mind from wandering to him. Where had he gone? Was he safe? And why did I care so much about a man I'd barely known? One afternoon, as I was serving lunch to a small group of villagers, the hum of conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of engines. It started as a faint hum but quickly grew louder, drawing the attention of everyone in the restaurant. Who could that be? Mrs. Henderson, one of the village's elders, asked. Her fork paused mid-air. I stepped to the window, wiping my hands on my apron, and froze. A convoy of sleek black cars was pulling into the village square, their polished exteriors gleaming in the sunlight. The sight was so out of place in our little village that I felt like I was watching a scene from a movie. The cars came to a stop in front of the restaurant, and the doors of the lead vehicle opened. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized the man stepping out. It was Zachary, but he wasn't the Zachary I remembered. Gone were the tattered clothes and weary posture. In their place was a man dressed in a tailored suit, his shoulders squared and his presence commanding. Zachary, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the murmurs of the gathering crowd. He turned toward me, a smile breaking across his face as our eyes met. Hello, Amanda. I stepped outside, my heart pounding. What's going on? Who are these people? And why are you dressed like that? Zachary hesitated, glancing around at the curious villagers before gesturing toward the cars. There's something I need to tell you, but it's better if we talk somewhere private. Will you come with me? I hesitated, my instincts warring with my curiosity. Sophie appeared at my side, clutching my hand tightly. Can Sophie come too? I asked. Of course, Zachary said, his smile reassuring. With Sophie's hand in mine, I followed him to one of the cars. The villagers whispered among themselves as we climbed in, the sleek interior unlike anything I'd ever seen. Sophie's wide eyes darted around the car, her excitement tempered by the uncertainty in the air. The drive was long and silent. The hum of the engine the only sound as we wound our way out of the village and into unfamiliar territory. Eventually, the cars pulled up to a grand estate, its towering gates opening to reveal a sprawling palace surrounded by lush gardens. I stared in awe as the car came to a stop. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is my home," Zachary said, stepping out of the car and offering his hand to help me. I took his hand, still reeling from the sheer opulence of the place. "Your home?" I echoed, my mind struggling to process the sight before me. "Zachary, what is this?" He turned to face me, his expression serious. "Amanda, I haven't been completely honest with you. My real name is Prince Zachary. I'm the eldest son of King Thorn of Eldenvale." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "A prince?" I repeated, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "You're a prince?" He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I left the palace in disguise to see the world and find people who were genuine. I wanted to understand life beyond the walls of privilege I've always known." I stared at him, my thoughts a whirlwind. "So everything you told me, everything about being hungry and homeless." "It was true," he said quickly. "I wasn't lying about that. But I didn't tell you the full truth about who I am." Before I could respond, the doors of the palace opened, and a tall, regal man stepped out. His presence was commanding, his posture straight and proud. "You must be Amanda," he said, his deep voice warm yet authoritative. "I'm King Thorn, Zachary's father." I managed a curtsy, my legs trembling beneath me. "Your Majesty," I stammered, my mind racing. The king's smile was kind. "You have nothing to fear, my dear. My son has told me everything about you and your kindness." I wanted to meet the woman who reminded him of the goodness in people. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat as I tried to make sense of the moment. This man, this prince, had stepped into my life and turned it upside down. And now I was standing in a palace, my daughter clutching my hand as we faced a king. I don't know what to say," I murmured, overwhelmed. The king placed a hand on my shoulder, his gaze steady. "You don't need to say anything. Just know that your kindness has changed more lives than you realize." As I looked between Zachary and his father, I felt a mixture of confusion, awe, and something I couldn't quite name, a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, this unexpected journey was leading me somewhere I was meant to be. The grandeur of the palace was overwhelming. I tried to focus on Sophie, who clung to my side with wide-eyed curiosity. Every corner of the place glimmered with opulence, from the marble floors to the towering crystal chandeliers. Yet, my thoughts were a storm of confusion and disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" I asked Zachary as we walked through an elaborately decorated corridor. "I didn't want you to see me as a prince," he admitted, his voice low. "I needed someone to treat me as a person, not as a title. And you did that." We stopped in front of a pair of massive doors, which swung open to reveal a lavish sitting room. King Thorn gestured for us to enter, his regal demeanor softened by an air of kindness. "Please, Amanda, sit. Let us talk." I hesitated, glancing at Zachary before nodding. Sophie climbed into the nearest armchair, swinging her legs as though this were just another adventure. Meanwhile, I perched on the edge of a gilded sofa, feeling out of place in the grand setting. The king's voice broke the silence. "Amanda, I owe you an explanation. My son left the palace months ago, determined to see the world without the shadow of royalty. It was an act of rebellion, but one with purpose. He wanted to find people who embodied the values we so often forget in our world: compassion, honesty, and integrity." Zachary stepped forward, his hands clasped tightly. "When I came to your village, I didn't expect to find someone like you. Your kindness wasn't just an act, it was who you are. You gave without hesitation, even when you had so little to spare." I swallowed hard, Emotions swirling. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. I never expected anything in return. And that, King Thorn interjected, is what makes you extraordinary. Many would have turned away or expected some reward. But you acted purely out of goodness. The weight of their words pressed on me. My small act of kindness, something I had thought was ordinary, had brought me to this moment. But it also left me feeling vulnerable. I'm just a single mother trying to keep a restaurant alive. I said softly. I'm not extraordinary. Zachary knelt beside me, his eyes earnest. You're wrong. Amanda. You've shown me what truly matters in life. You reminded me that power and wealth mean nothing without connection and compassion. Sophie, who had been quietly observing, chimed in with the innocence only a child could possess. Mama always says kindness makes the world better. King Thorn smiled warmly. Wise words. Sophie, your mother has taught you well. The conversation shifted, and the king spoke of his desire to honor the kindness I had shown Zachary. Your restaurant. Amanda, he said. It represents everything we wish to promote in our kingdom, community, warmth, and resilience. I'd like to help you expand it. I blinked. Stunned. Expand it? How? With the resources of the royal family, the king explained. We'll renovate and advertise it, turning it into a cornerstone of your village. People from across the kingdom will come, not just for the food but for the spirit of generosity you've created. I opened my mouth to protest, but Zachary placed a gentle hand on mine. This isn't charity, Amanda. It's an investment in something truly meaningful. Overwhelmed. I nodded, tears prickling my eyes. Thank you. I whispered. I don't know how to repay you. The king's expression softened. You've already repaid us by reminding my son and me that there's still goodness in the world. That night, as Sophie and I settled into the guest quarters of the palace, I lay awake, staring at the ornate ceiling. My mind replayed the events of the day. The weight of Zachary's words and the king's offer heavy on my heart. Was I ready for this change? Could I accept their help without losing the independence I'd fought so hard to maintain? Sophie's soft voice broke my thoughts. Mama, do you think we'll see Mr. Zachary again when we go home? I reached over to stroke her hair, marveling at her ability to find joy in the simplest things. I think so. Sweetheart. Good, she murmured, her eyelids drooping. He makes you smile. Her words lingered long after she had drifted to sleep. Perhaps she was right. Despite my reservations, there was something about Zachary that stirred a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, as the sun cast its golden light over the palace gardens, King Thorn invited me to a private breakfast. Amanda, he said, I want you to know that my son's future is his own to shape. And I believe you've played a significant role in helping him see that. I glanced at Zachary, who stood nearby, his expression a mix of hope and vulnerability. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. The king's gaze was steady. Zachary's journey brought him to you for a reason. What happens next is up to both of you. As I prepared to return to the village later that day, Zachary walked me to the car. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice soft. I hope you'll let me visit you and Sophie soon. I smiled, feeling the first stirrings of something I couldn't yet name. We'd like that. As the car pulled away, the palace fading into the distance, I realized that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. And for the first time in a long while, I welcomed the uncertainty, knowing that kindness had set me on a path filled with hope and possibility. The village seemed smaller than I remembered. Or perhaps it was just that my perspective had changed. Sophie, as energetic as ever, hopped out of the car as soon as it stopped in front of the restaurant. She ran to the door, excitedly pointing out the changes she imagined would come now that Mr. Zachary's dad had offered to help us. The villagers had gathered around, curious about the sleek car and my unexpected return. Whispers filled the air, their gazes bouncing between me and the car's retreating convoy. I felt their curiosity prickling at my back as I unlocked the door to Amanda's kitchen. The worn sign swinging lightly in the breeze. I stepped inside, taking in the familiar scent of old wood and the faint aroma of spices lingering from the last meal I'd cooked here. It was quiet, just as I had left it, and the reality of my struggles returned. Despite the excitement of the palace, this restaurant remained the center of my world. A place where Sophie and I had poured our hopes and dreams. As I turned to face the villagers who had trickled into the doorway, I cleared my throat. "Thank you for coming by," I said, smiling warmly. "I promise there will be exciting news soon. But for now, it's just us getting back to work." The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Only a few stayed behind, their faces familiar and kind. Mrs. Harper, the elderly woman who always ordered the soup of the day, reached out to pat my arm. "You've always had a good heart, Amanda," she said, her voice tinged with pride. "Whatever comes next, we're here for you." Her words were a balm to my overwhelmed mind. I smiled, nodding as Sophie tugged at my hand, eager to show me something she had drawn on the menu board while I was away. It was a picture of the restaurant with bright flowers around it and smiling faces in the windows. Underneath, she had scrawled in her childlike handwriting, "Amanda's Kitchen, where love lives." The simplicity of her message brought a lump to my throat. Despite everything, Sophie always found a way to center herself in what truly mattered. Perhaps I could learn from her. The renovations began within days. Workers arrived early, their tools clanging and voices filling the usually quiet mornings. At first, I felt out of place among the organized chaos. My modest little restaurant was being transformed into something I could never have imagined. The floors were replaced with polished wood. The kitchen expanded to accommodate more customers, and the sign above the door was carefully refurbished, its faded letters restored to their original charm. Sophie loved every minute of it. She dashed between the workers, offering imaginary help and giggling when they played along. The village children often joined her, their laughter echoing down the cobbled streets. It wasn't long before the entire community became invested in the changes. They volunteered to paint walls, sew curtains, and even plant flowers around the building. The restaurant's transformation became a village affair, and I began to feel the weight of my earlier doubts lift. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. One sunny afternoon, as the final touches were being added, a familiar sight stopped me in my tracks. The royal convoy pulled up to the village once again, and this time, Zachary stepped out alone. His presence drew the attention of everyone nearby, their whispers of excitement filling the air. He walked toward me, his smile warm but tinged with uncertainty. "I couldn't stay away," he said, almost sheepishly. "I wanted to see how everything was going." I gestured toward the bustling restaurant, its vibrant new life shining in the afternoon sun. "See for yourself," I said, unable to suppress a grin. "It's coming together beautifully." "It's more than beautiful," he said, his tone soft. "It's a testament to what you've built here, Amanda." I felt a warmth spread through me at his words. But before I could respond, Sophie ran up to him. "Mr. Zachary," she cried, throwing her arms around his legs. "Did you come to help us again?" He laughed, scooping her up with ease. "Maybe I did," he said, winking at her. "What do you think needs fixing next?" Sophie considered this seriously. "The porch swing," she decided, pointing to the creaky old swing that had been part of the restaurant for years. "Mama says it's wobbly." "Well then," Zachary said, setting her down, "I'll make it my priority." As he and Sophie examined the swing, I watched them with a mix of gratitude and wonder. Zachary's presence had become something I hadn't realized I needed. He had a way of grounding me, of making me feel seen in a world where I had often felt invisible. By the time the restaurant reopened, it was unrecognizable. The new space gleamed with fresh energy, yet it still retained the warmth and charm that had always made it special. Customers poured in from the village and beyond, their curiosity drawn by the changes and their hearts captivated by the same kindness that had always defined Amanda's kitchen. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and humility. This wasn't just a business anymore, it was a place where stories were shared, connections were made, and lives were enriched. And in the midst of it all, I found myself looking forward to whatever came next, knowing that kindness had paved the way. The day of the grand reopening arrived with an air of excitement that buzzed through the entire village. Early that morning, I stood outside Amanda's kitchen, gazing at the polished new sign above the door. The familiar letters, now bold and freshly painted, seemed to reflect the transformation of not just the restaurant, but of my journey. The flowers Sophie had insisted on planting around the entrance added a splash of color, framing the door with vibrant blooms. Villagers began to gather long before opening time. Children ran along the cobblestone streets, their laughter filling the crisp morning air. Friends and neighbors exchanged eager whispers, curious to see what had become of the once modest restaurant they had known for years. I adjusted my apron, took a deep breath, and smiled, ready to welcome them into this new chapter. At exactly 10 o'clock, I unlocked the door and stepped aside as the first guests filed in. Their expressions of awe and delight were all the reassurance I needed. The new polished floors gleamed, the expanded seating areas felt spacious yet inviting, and the carefully curated decor exuded a charm that felt both elegant and warm. It was Amanda's kitchen, but better still ours. Still home. Sophie, ever the spirited hostess, dashed from table to table, proudly pointing out the changes she had helped with. "Mama and I picked those curtains," she announced to a group of curious villagers. "And look, that's the porch swing Mr. Zachary fixed." I chuckled as I caught Zachary's eye from across the room. He had arrived quietly, blending into the crowd as if trying not to draw attention to himself. But his presence, steady and reassuring, was impossible to ignore. He raised his hand in a small wave, and I nodded in return, grateful for the role he had played in making this day possible. The hours flew by in a blur of activity. Plates of food were carried out. Laughter rang through the air, and the energy of the room was contagious. I moved between the kitchen and the dining area, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Despite the hustle, I couldn't stop smiling. Seeing the restaurant bustling with life again felt like a dream come true. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the village, the crowd began to thin. Customers lingered on the porch, chatting and enjoying the view, while others bid me farewell with warm handshakes and promises to return. The restaurant had officially reopened, and it was a success. I finally allowed myself a moment to rest, sinking into one of the newly upholstered chairs and savoring the stillness. Sophie climbed into my lap, resting her head against my shoulder. "You did it, Mama," she said, her voice full of pride. "You made it so beautiful." "We did it, sweetheart," I replied, brushing her hair back. "It wouldn't have been the same without you." Just then, Zachary approached, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea. "You deserve this," he said, placing one in front of me. "It's been quite a day." "Thank you," I said, accepting the cup and feeling the warmth seep into my hands. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shrugged, sitting across from me. "You give me too much credit, Amanda. All I did was offer a little help. The heart of this place, that's all you." His words, spoken with such sincerity, made my chest tighten. I looked at him, the man who had walked into my life in the most unexpected way and turned it upside down. He had shown me a world beyond my struggles. But more importantly, he had reminded me of my own strength. "Zachary," I began, my voice steady, "I don't think I've ever properly thanked you for everything. Not just for the restaurant, but for believing in me when I doubted myself." "You don't need to thank me," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Being here, seeing what you've built, has been a privilege." For a moment, We sat in silence, the hum of the evening settling around us. Sophie had fallen asleep, her small body curled against mine, her breathing soft and even. Zachary's eyes softened as he glanced at her, then back at me. "Amanda," he said quietly, "I've been thinking a lot about what's next. About this place. The village. You and Sophie." I felt my heart skip, unsure of what he was leading to. His expression was calm but earnest, his usual confidence tinged with vulnerability. "I want to be part of this," he continued, "not just as someone who visits or helps from the sidelines, but truly part of it. Part of your life." The weight of his words settled between us, and I felt a rush of emotions: hope, uncertainty, and something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time: possibility. I took a deep breath, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure, Zachary? This isn't the life you're used to." He smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand. "It's not the life I thought I wanted," he admitted, "but it's the one I know I need." In that moment, under the warm glow of the restaurant lights and surrounded by the village that had become a part of my soul, I realized that I didn't have to face the future alone. The kindness that had brought Zachary into my life had now opened a door to something even greater: a chance for love, for family, and for a life filled with meaning. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. The journey had been long and uncertain, but it had brought me to this moment. And for the first time, I was ready to embrace it fully. As the stars twinkled above, Amanda stood outside her thriving restaurant, watching the warm lights inside flicker with life and laughter. Sophie played nearby, her giggles a sweet melody in the quiet night. Zachary stepped beside Amanda, his hand brushing hers as they exchanged a smile filled with unspoken promises. The journey had been one of trials, loss, and unexpected connections. But through it all, Amanda had discovered the profound power of kindness and resilience. Her small act of generosity had opened a door to a new life, one filled with love, purpose, and the strength of community. As the camera panned to the glowing sign of Amanda's kitchen, Amanda turned, her voice calm yet powerful. "Kindness transforms lives, one step at a time." Thank you for joining this story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more inspiring tales on life stories.